Let me slow you down for just a second, because what I'm about to say is where most people finally realize why their blood pressure hasn't been responding the way they hoped. Today, we're talking about the top 3 exercises to lower blood pressure naturally. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Wanting lower numbers isn't enough. If you truly want to change your blood pressure, you have to change how your body moves every single day. Because movement is not optional for your arteries, it's communication. And most people are sending the wrong message. They think they need a gym membership, expensive equipment, or endless miles of running. But the science tells a very different story. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's what surprises almost everyone. The exercises that work best for lowering blood pressure are not flashy, they're not exhausting, and they're definitely not what most people are doing. In fact, the strongest cardiology research points away from treadmills and toward a very specific type of movement that directly rewires how your blood vessels and nervous system behave. And that's exactly why in this video, I'm walking you through the same 3 exercises I give my own patients, because I've watched these movements lower blood pressure quickly, consistently, and without adding a single medication. That's not theory, that's clinical reality, and it's why this matters so much. But before we dive into the exercises themselves, you need to understand why exercise works for blood pressure in the first place, because it's probably not the reason you've been told. Most people believe exercise lowers blood pressure simply because it burns calories and leads to weight loss. But that explanation barely scratches the surface. The real effect happens much deeper, because exercise acts directly on your arteries themselves. Think of your arteries like garden hoses. When they're stiff and rigid, blood has to push harder just to get through, so pressure builds up inside. But when those hoses are flexible, blood flows smoothly and pressure naturally comes down. Exercise is what restores that flexibility, and once that happens, your numbers finally start to make sense. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because arterial flexibility is only part of the story. There's another mechanism at play that almost nobody talks about, and it has nothing to do with muscles or calories. It has everything to do with your nervous system. Your body runs on 2 pedals. The gas pedal, known as the sympathetic nervous system, revs you up into fight or flight. The brake pedal, the parasympathetic nervous system, slows you down and brings you back into rest and recovery. And here's the problem. Most people with high blood pressure are living with the gas pedal pressed down almost all the time. What exercise does, when it's done correctly, is strengthen the brake pedal. Over time, it teaches your body how to shift gears again. Instead of being stuck in a constant state of tension, your nervous system relearns how to relax. And when that happens, blood pressure drops as a downstream effect. The most fascinating part is how fast this can start. You don't need months of training. With the right exercises, nervous system changes can begin within a week. And that's exactly why the next part of this matters so much. All 3 exercises we're about to talk about fall into a category called isometric exercises. That simply means you're creating tension without movement. But that stillness is precisely what makes them so powerful for blood pressure. The first exercise is wall sits, and it's far more effective than it looks. You place your back against a wall, bend your knees to a comfortable angle, and hold. No movement, no momentum, just steady tension. And according to decades of clinical trials, this type of training lowers blood pressure more than traditional cardio, more than strength training, and more than high-intensity workouts. In fact, wall sits alone can lower systolic blood pressure by around 10 points on average. That's the same reduction many people see when they start their first blood pressure medication. The difference is this comes without side effects. You start with 30 seconds. Work your way toward 1 to 3 minutes. Repeat it a few times. And breathe the entire time. And that breathing part is critical, because holding your breath can spike pressure temporarily, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. Done correctly, wall sits don't just lower blood pressure. They strengthen your legs, your core, and your balance, which becomes more important every single year you age. But what if you don't have a wall, or you want to take this one step further? That's where the second exercise comes in. Squat holds. Think of them as wall sits without the wall. You're using your own body to create stability, which forces your nervous system to work even harder. You drop into a squat, only as low as feels safe and comfortable, and you hold, again, 30 seconds to start, gradually building up. The key here is control. Your feet stay planted, your knees stay aligned, and your breathing stays steady, because every detail matters when blood pressure is involved. Squat holds don't just train your legs, they train resilience. They make everyday tasks easier, like climbing stairs or carrying groceries. And at the same time, they reinforce that nervous system brake pedal we talked about earlier. And if you need support, you can use a chair. If you're advanced, you can add lightweight. The exercise adapts to you, not the other way around, and that's why it works so well across all ages. Now, we've trained the lower body, but there's one more piece we can't ignore because it connects everything together, your core. This brings us to the third exercise, planks. Planks are full body isometric contractions, and they are one of the most effective ways to teach your nervous system how to stay calm under stress. Study after study shows that consistent plank training lowers both systolic and diastolic blood pressure while also improving posture and reducing low back pain. And again, the rules are the same. Start small, build gradually, and never hold your breath. When you put all of this together, something important becomes clear. These exercises work not because they're intense, but because they're precise. They send the right signals to your arteries and your nervous system at the same time. And while any movement is better than none, these movements have been shown to outperform traditional exercise when it comes to blood pressure specifically. A 5 to 10 point drop may not sound dramatic, but it translates into a massive reduction in stroke risk. That's not a small improvement. That's life-changing. And if you're feeling like there's a lot to remember, that's okay. I've put together a free resource that breaks all of this down step by step, and you can grab it below. But here's the most important thing to understand as we close this section. Exercise is powerful, but it's only half the equation. If you really want to bring your blood pressure down quickly and keep it there, what you eat matters just as much. And in the next part, we're going to talk about the 3 foods that make the biggest difference. Because once you combine movement with the right nutrition, the results can be dramatic. Now, this is where everything clicks. Because if exercise is the signal you send to your body, food is the environment that signal has to work in. And most people are unknowingly fighting themselves every single day. They're doing the wall sits, they're holding the planks, they're trying to walk more, but their blood pressure refuses to budge because the internal chemistry never changes. And here's the hard truth. You cannot out-exercise a diet that keeps your arteries irritated and your nervous system on edge. But the good news is, you don't need perfection. You need precision. Let me start by dismantling one of the most damaging myths in blood pressure management. People think lowering blood pressure means eating bland food, cutting all salt, and living in constant restriction. But that approach almost always backfires because the body doesn't respond well to deprivation. Instead, blood pressure improves when you give your body the specific nutrients it uses to relax blood vessels, balance fluids, and calm the nervous system. Once you understand that, the entire conversation around food changes because now you're no longer taking things away, you're adding the right things in. The first nutritional lever is something your arteries desperately need, yet most people are chronically low in potassium. Potassium works like a natural counterbalance to sodium. While sodium tends to pull water into the bloodstream and increase pressure, potassium helps the kidneys flush excess sodium out. But here's where people go wrong. They hear potassium and think supplements. That's not where the real power is. The real effect comes from potassium-rich whole foods because they arrive packaged with fiber, antioxidants, and minerals that amplify the blood pressure lowering effect. Foods like leafy greens, beans, avocados, and sweet potatoes don't just raise potassium levels, they directly improve how your blood vessels respond to pressure. And when those vessels relax, your numbers drop. Slowly at first, then consistently. This is why people who eat diets rich in these foods often see improvements even before they lose a single pound. But potassium alone isn't enough. because blood pressure is not just a fluid problem, it's an inflammation problem too. That brings us to the second critical category, foods that reduce vascular inflammation. When your arteries are inflamed, they become less flexible, more reactive, and more sensitive to stress. And stress, as you now know, is gasoline on the fire of high blood pressure. Omega-3 fats play a massive role here. They calm inflammation at the cellular level and improve endothelial function, which is the lining of your blood vessels. Fatty fish, walnuts, flax seeds, and chia seeds all contribute to this effect, but only when they're consumed consistently. What's fascinating is that when inflammation drops, blood pressure often follows, even if nothing else changes. People assume stress management requires meditation or breathing exercises, but nutrition can lower stress chemically. It shifts the internal environment toward calm, which then reinforces everything you're doing with exercise. This is where the cause and effect loop really starts working in your favor, because now your body is finally aligned. But there's one more food category that quietly sabotages blood pressure when it's missing and supports it when it's present. Magnesium. Magnesium is involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, including muscle relaxation and nerve signaling. When magnesium levels are low, blood vessels constrict more easily, the nervous system stays on edge, and blood pressure rises. The problem is that modern diets strip magnesium out at every step, so deficiency is incredibly common. Dark chocolate with high cocoa content, nuts, seeds, and whole grains are some of the best dietary sources. And no, this doesn't mean eating a chocolate bar every night. It means strategically including magnesium-rich foods so your vessels can relax the way they're designed to. When magnesium intake improves, many people notice better sleep, fewer muscle cramps, and a subtle but steady drop in blood pressure. And sleep, by the way, is another piece of this puzzle that almost nobody connects properly. Because here's something that rarely gets said out loud. High blood pressure is not a single problem. It's a signal that multiple systems are out of sync. Movement, nutrition, sleep, stress, and timing all interact. That's why quick fixes fail. And it's why combining the right exercises with the right foods produces results that feel almost effortless compared to trying to force change through willpower alone. Now, before you think this means you have to overhaul your entire diet overnight, let me stop you right there. You don't. In fact, the fastest improvements often come from small, strategic changes, adding one potassium-rich food per day, swapping one inflammatory snack for something magnesium-rich, pairing your isometric exercises with meals that support recovery instead of fighting it. These are low-friction changes, but they create high-impact results when done consistently. And this is where most people miss the final piece. Consistency doesn't mean intensity. It means repetition without resistance. The body loves rhythm. When you move at the same time each day, eat similar supportive foods, and reinforce the same signals, blood pressure responds because it finally feels safe enough to change. Safety, not force, is what allows your nervous system to let go of that constant fight or flight state. So if you take nothing else away from this series, remember this. Lowering blood pressure naturally is not about doing more. It's about doing the right things in the right order. First, you restore movement that softens arteries and strengthens the nervous system. Then you support that change with foods that reduce inflammation and balance minerals. And once those two are working together, your body does what it was always capable of doing. But there's still one layer we haven't touched yet. One factor that can override perfect exercise and perfect nutrition if it's ignored. And it's something almost everyone gets wrong, even people who think they're doing everything right. That's what we're going to uncover next, because once you understand this final piece, you'll see blood pressure in a completely different way.